Chapter 5, Stephen's Preaching. As we finish chapter 4, we're discussing about the romantic relationship of Abigail and Saul. Most special one, something that we regard as role model for us. Not only that, but we need to mention that Emmanuel himself clearly describes Saul at 30 years of age, thinking that in his opinion every man should keep himself from inferior contacts with the world until he reached the nuptial bed. So we are talking about his virginal features, something that is also not very common, not at the time only, but also to modern times. But here we have Saul in this new chapter. Saul and his friend Zadok decided to repress these movements of the men of the way. They decide to visit the humble church of Jerusalem, where Simon Peter, John, James, and Philip were leading the efforts of Jesus' teachings. And he describes Emmanuel that the church of the time was actually humble and built at the cost of much sacrifice. Something that is also teaching for us Spiritists nowadays. It's very common that we should, make lots of efforts and work hard to build our centers. It was no different to the first followers of Jesus. Not only that, but once Saul and Zadok entered with some friends at the church, some people were apprehensive, but, John and Peter were not. They were faithful to God. James, on the other hand, was a little bit, concerned because he knew much of what the Pharisees were able to do. And we find at the time something that is very particular, a reflection to the time. Let's brainstorm this. Who is actually entitled to the truth? Here we have Saul convinced that he is, with the law of Moses on his hands, the one entitled to the truth. And every other person is not entitled to the truth. Nowadays, unfortunately, even in the Christian movement in the world, we find people who behave as the same Pharisees of the time. They think they are the sole people who are entitled to the truth, the so-called fundamentalist Christians. With all the respect, we shall not behave as the Pharisees of the time of Jesus. Who is actually entitled? What do you think? Who is entitled to the truth? Spiritism will reflect on this as Allan Kardec asked the very question to the spirits in the Spirits book. And the superior spirits say that in our conscience lie the foundation of the laws of God. So the answer is, everyone is entitled to the truth. Something that Saul had to learn the hard way. The hard way because once he was there visiting the church, suddenly he observed that there were many people he was in his arrogance, despising the people who were the lepers, who were sick, who were poor, and were being taken care by the men of the way. And then he was amazed because suddenly somebody said, "Here's Stephen. Stephen is coming." And Stephen was entering, and as he entered, he started preaching. Preaching the most beautiful words. Preaching and adapted to the culture of the time, which is also a lesson for us as we disseminate Spiritism. He was adapted to the local culture. He was talking about the very teachings that we learned in the scriptures of the time. He was recalling the passages of Moses, of Christ, and trying to bridge them, culturally adapting. Not only that, but he was calling everyone to the reality that the Messiah had come to fulfill the law that Moses had settled. As simple as it was. But Saul could not take it. He could not take because he was hurt in his pride. So hurt that he actually stood up and defied. He challenged Stephen himself. He said, "Oh, you pious Galileans, where is the sense in this strange and absurd doctrine? Who was this Christ? Was he not a simple carpenter?" How many people still nowadays, claiming that they are Christ followers, they still expect that the people who follow Christ will never be disturbed by any challenges? How many people are confused, still immersed in illusions, that actually Christ came to give us tools so we could overcome our challenges, face our problems with dignity. Well, so was challenging, and then a most important lesson for us, a lesson for us as human beings, but also a lesson for us as Spiritists and Spiritist practitioners. When he saw that Saul wanted to argue, he said, "May Christ be with us," and he started living. And Saul challenged him, "How come you want to stop this argument?" And he said, "Christ has taught us not to argue." And in that conversation, in deep admiration, we find our man and friend, John. And this is a very important observation by Emmanuel. He says on page 111 that John set his tender eyes on Stephen, identifying once more in his ardent speech the evangelical message interpreted by a beloved disciple of the unforgettable Master, who was never absent from those who gathered together in his name. Again, here we call ourselves to this very important reflection. How many times, even in the Spiritist movement, we find those who think they are more entitled to the truth of Spiritism just because they have been longer studying Spiritism? Are we truly the ones entitled? Why are we not to follow? Why can't we follow John's example? John was the disciple who lived with the Master. Peter as well, James as well. But when they got to meet Stephen, they opened a pathway to Stephen. Of course, Stephen made himself be deserving of such authority, but at the same time, they never thought they were more entitled to the truth than Stephen. They were really Jesus followers. They understood that everyone is entitled to the truth. How about us? Are we struggling with our pride like Saul, thinking that we're the only ones entitled to the truth, even the Spiritist truth? Let's think about it. It's not a matter of time, of how long we've been working in Spiritism here or there. It's about how much we really love God and follow His will in whatever way and means and whatever label we can give it to this attitude towards life. Let's reflect on this as we continue with the next chapter, chapter 6.